Today we're going to break down what characters will still join the Straw Hat crew, and with where we're at in the story right now, there's a lot of popular options across the community, so I want to discuss each of them individually, including the narrative behind them joining, their potential role, the hurdles in the way, and what would need to happen for them to actually join, and of course a prediction on whether they will join or not. And if you're wondering whether or not the crew even needs more crewmates in the first place, well, I would say that we need at least one, because for one thing, Luffy said at the very beginning of the story he wanted a crew of about 10 people, and if you're not counting him amongst the Straw Hats, he only has 9, so there may be some foreshadowing there. But also, Blackbeard has 10 Titanic captains underneath him, and it feels like his crew is destined to match up against the Straw Hats eventually, so the Straw Hats would need one more to make those matchups even. Now, of course, there are a lot of theories out there that Kuzan could be a double agent of some sort and betray Teach, so then we wouldn't need another member, but as of now, the Straw Hats definitely need one more, and honestly, I think we're probably going to get at least one more than that. I mean, Roger and Rox both had more than 10 members underneath them, and Luffy and Teach obviously parallel them in so many ways, so who knows how many we're going to get by the end. But I will say that one person who is joining the crew for sure is Nefertari D. Vivi. And I would even argue that she's been a Straw Hat this entire time, but you know, she just had some other matters to tend to for a while. But with her riding around in Morgan's flying ship, you know, hiding from the government, and also how she photoshopped the X on Luffy's arm in the paper, and only the Straw Hats who didn't get X's on their arms in Alabasta saw it, it feels like Vivi's return to the crew is not only inevitable, but also imminent, because we were even with her when we met Dorian Broggie back in Little Garden, so Elbaf would be a great place for her to meet up with everybody. But I do think that we're going to need at least one more crewmate in addition to Vivi, because for one thing, she's not really a fighter, and thus I don't see her facing off against a Blackbeard pirate in the end. I mean, yes, I know that she was in Baroque Works for a while, and power levels in One Piece are pretty malleable. There's also lots of theories out there about her getting the Paw fruit eventually, which could close the gap, but I just don't see her peacock slashing any Titanic captains, because her role in the story is also much bigger than that. Like, she's gonna have way bigger fish to fry than just fighting Vasco Shot or Pizarro or somebody. And this is not only due to the fact that she's wanted by Imu right now, but we now know Nefertari D. Lily was a central figure to the Void Century. I would have to imagine that Vivi is gonna have a role similar to that as well. Not the same, mind you, but she's definitely gonna be more central to the issues with the government in Void Century than almost anything else. I mean, Imu had her bounty poster and wants to retrieve her for a reason. And I think Vivi's role, both for the crew and the story as a whole, is gonna revolve around how she's a true diplomat, which is fittingly almost the opposite to a fighter. We saw this when Wapol hit her as a child at the Reverie, but she refused to make a fuss over it since it could lead to war. We saw this when she told Luffy to calm the hell down so they could get Nami some help in Drum Kingdom, and we even saw it when she ironically fought Luffy in Alabasta because she didn't want anyone to die. So while I do expect Vivi to rejoin the crew, and probably pretty soon, I don't think that she's going to be peacock slashing the Blackbeard pirates. So we would then need at least one more member to make those matchups even, and the first option that I want to talk about is Loki, who was already given an invitation to join the Straw Hats, which is always a pretty good sign, but he turned it down. For now at least. But this man has quickly become a fan favorite amongst the community, and with the awesome introduction that he's had thus far, and his sad backstory, which seems to be a prerequisite for a lot of the Straw Hats, he seems to be a pretty good candidate. Not to mention the fact that he's a giant, which we don't have on the crew yet. But the biggest thing that helps Loki's argument, at least in my opinion, is how Luffy has sensed something good in Loki since the moment he met him, despite all of the negative rumors. Because this is something that Luffy has done with other crewmates before as well, with the best example maybe being Zoro, because there's actually a lot of parallels between these two. Zoro and Loki were both tied up when Luffy met them, both of them had a reputation as a bad guy, even though that wasn't quite true, and both were extremely strong, at least for the point in the story we were at. But Luffy was able to see through all of that and recognize Zoro was worthy of becoming his first crewmate, and I think we're seeing a similar thing here now with Loki. Even when Robin asked to join, Luffy said right away, "Don't worry, she's not a bad person," even though she was a trained assassin by that point. She was basically the vice president of Baroque Works before she pulled up on the ship and said that she's joining. Or even when they all met Brook, Luffy wasn't worried that he was a talking, singing skeleton in a dark part of the ocean. He instead instead just thought he was really cool and invited him to join. Luffy has a very good sense for what a person is really like, and he's often right. It's one of his most underappreciated abilities. One of my favorite quotes in the story that I've brought up on this channel like a dozen times now is when Rayleigh asked Luffy what he would do when he finds strong opponents that can see into the future. Luffy said that it just depends on their personality. This is something that Luffy picks up on naturally, and given how important the giants are to the story, even to the point that Gunko said whichever side the giants choose will greatly affect the outcome of the final war, there's obviously some narrative importance behind Loki and Luffy becoming friends eventually. But will Loki really become a full-fledged Straw Hat? Well, there are a few issues there as well, with the biggest one being Loki's size. We have some pretty big logistical issues there, which Zoro and Sanji eloquently pointed out, starting with how he's just too big to fit on the Sunny. I mean, this is actually a problem that Blackbeard has as well with San Juan Wolf, who just walks through the ocean on his own even though he has a devil fruit because he's tall enough to do so, but I really don't see Luffy forcing his friend to do that. There's also been some fun fan art recently about Loki being kind of pulled behind the ship on his own separate boat, but that still wouldn't solve the second biggest problem, which is that Loki would just eat all of their food. The ship is not big enough to bring food for a giant. So then maybe you're wondering, well, can we just enlarge the Sunny somehow? I mean, we are on Elbaf with the Atom Tree, which was used to make the Sunny, but then we would have other logistical problems. Like, if the ship was really that big, well, how is Jinbei gonna steer a massive wheel? Like, can he even see over the thing? Plus, walking across the ship would take ages for an average-sized person. So the best solution that I can see to get Loki on the ship, because I'm gonna be real, I do want to see Loki join pretty bad, is what a lot of the community has been talking about lately, which is that Loki's legendary devil fruit might just be one that lets him shrink down the normal size. Maybe it's a new model of a human fruit, which is probably the most likely idea since we know the Nika fruit is a model of a human fruit, and Loki did say that he was the sun god, so maybe there's some connection there. And I think that became more likely after chapter 1166, where we got this discussion between Rox and Loki, where Loki said that he thought Rox was Nika, which was a definite parallel to King saying that Kaido was Joy Boy, by the way. And after Loki explained who Nika was, Rox responded by saying if anyone's got that sort of power, it's Herald, which could potentially imply that the Fruit of Elbaf is something Nika related. But honestly, any kind of shape-shifting devil fruit could work. Anything that's gonna let him be smaller than he is now. And as far as Loki's role on the crew, I think he would definitely be our torturer. Now, I'm not entirely sure how much torture the Straw Hats are really gonna engage in, but we recently learned that Roger had one of these, and Millet Pine's even wearing a Viking helmet, which just screams some sort of tie to Elbaf, and I think that Loki would have been a perfect fit for this anyway. So to me, this size issue is sort of the linchpin in this whole debate, so we're gonna have to see where Oda goes with it, because alternatively, what Oda would do is just have Loki stay in Elbaf as the new king, because they don't have one right now, and then maybe just join us in the final war with all the other people from the different countries we've been to. So for now, I'm gonna give Loki a true 50-50 chance to join the crew, but that'll either go to 100 or 0 depending on what his devil fruit is. So I guess we'll just have to see. But now we're on to Yamato, and Yamato's a tough one because we already got pump faked at the end of Wano, where every sign was pointing towards the Oni princess joining the crew, but then we got the rug pulled out from under us because Yamato stayed to live like Odin for a while and journey around Wano and help protect the place. But we also recently finished the Yamato cover story, which showed us Yamato completing said Odin journey, and while I think a lot of us were expecting to get a bit more than we got, although the Kozuki Moria reveal was pretty awesome, we saw it end with Yamato still on Wano with no clear path out of there. So if we're ever gonna get Yamato on the crew, then I think the logistics are honestly the biggest problem. Because if I'm being honest, there's a lot of reasons why Yamato would be a perfect fit for the crew, especially at this point in the story. I mean, for one thing, the last Pirate King had Odin on the crew, so the next Pirate King should have the next Odin, if you ask me. And if Yamato can serve as our crew's scribe like Odin did for Roger, that might be pretty cool to see what happens to that book by the end of the story, just like what happened to Odin's journal. And Yamato joining would also give us another connection to Ace, which Jinbei sort of did as well, and that's always appreciated. But like I said, the logistics of physically getting Yamato from point A to B is the main problem. But the one thing for me that really trumps all the other factors is how Yamato told us, "I'm sure I'll find my way if I follow in his footsteps, and I'm bound to make it out to sea sooner or later. This has always made me feel like Oda is just doing to Yamato what he did with Jinbei, where he teases a new crew member at first, but then just has them join at a crucial time later. And I think Yamato's quote is actually some strong foreshadowing, because after Odin traveled around Wano, he was then taken away by a pirate who landed there, which was of course Whitebeard. And now that Yamato has traveled all around Wano like Odin, even picking up some scabbards in Ulti and page 1, Yamato is basically at the very same point as Odin, where someone needs to pull up and provide a way off the island. And one option for this that I really like is Blackbeard, because there's been a lot of theories about Teach showing up to potentially get Pluton after meeting Caribou, and with how deeply Blackbeard ties to Whitebeard, even having his devil fruit, we could have a total recreation of the Odin and Whitebeard thing, but with Yamato and Blackbeard. And I'm not sure Yamato even knows that Blackbeard is evil or had a hand in Ace's death, so that could be a way out of Wano, and would probably also provide a pretty funny plot point later on, because I would imagine that Yamato's gag amongst the crew, like how Zoro gets lost all the time or Sanji loves women, would be that Yamato is just completely oblivious to a lot of the basic things that most of the people around the world know. We kinda saw the same thing with Odin when traveling with Roger or Whitebeard. He was always amazed at the different islands they were going to, and the different races they were seeing, or the different plants, and that's all a byproduct of just being stuck within the borders of Wano, and I would argue that it's even worse for Yamato after being chained up all those years. That's part of the reason why Yamato wanted to explore around the rest of Wano, but like I said, now that that's completed, it's probably time for Yamato to see more of the world. And if you don't like the Blackbeard idea, then honestly anyone who's coming for Pluton could potentially be an option, either by going there and just befriending Yamato so it's kind of a serendipitous thing like Whitebeard and Odin, or by Pluton just actually getting freed, which would necessitate Yamato's action in some way. Maybe Momo would fly them all over to Elbaf to warn the crew, or Pluton is a ship, so maybe Yamato just takes that. Either way, I think there's just a lot of ways that Oda could write in a path for Yamato to get back to the crew, and not only are there options for it, I think it would make a lot of sense for Yamato to be in Elbaf, because we're learning a lot about the ancient giants right now, and I think Onis are connected to them one way or another, because obviously both of these races have horns, right? Onis might be an offshoot to the ancient giants in a similar way to the Buccaneers having giant's blood. And if that's true, then why wouldn't we get the Oni princess involved? And that goes double if Kaido does come back, because remember, he had that line to Yamato when they were fighting about how you're an offspring to an Oni. The friendship of humans is beneath you. This has always felt like something that needs a little more exposition, and Elbaf seems like the right place for it. So all things considered, I do believe Yamato is going to join the crew. Oda's kind of set it up already, there's a lot of narrative reasons for it that could have solid payoffs, and it would just be a lot of fun. Not to mention that Yamato would also be a perfect fit for the Straw Hat vs Blackbeard pirate matchups. Because as I'm sure most of you already know, I've been covering all those matchups for a while now, and the only one I have left to cover, before Luffy and Teach at least, is this one. Because I think Yamato is the perfect matchup for Katarina Devon. Both of them have mythical dog zones. Devon is the Crescent Moon Hunter, and the sign of the Wano Alliance was a crescent moon tattoo. So the full video on that matchup will be out sometime in 2026, in case you want to subscribe for that. But now we're moving on to our next candidate, which is Jewelry Bonney. And Bonney is another character who's become a fan favorite rather recently, and for good reason I might add, thanks to the Kuma flashback. And now she's already sailed with the Straw Hats over to Elbaf, so I know there's a lot of fans out there who want Bonney to join the crew full time now, basically becoming our apprentice since she's still only 12 years old. And I mean, it would be pretty interesting for her to join from a narrative perspective as well, because she's even a believer in Sun God Nika, obviously, even to the point that she's able to tap into Gear 5 herself. So I think there's a lot of potential there. Like, could she maybe use her powers to turn the whole crew into Gear 5th? And while I do love Bonney as a character and I can see her as a Straw Hat, the biggest holdup for me is what Oda's planning with Kuma right now. Because I was personally a believer that he was going to meet his fate during Egghead. Seemed like Oda was kind of setting that up. But not only did Kuma make it out alive, or sort of alive because he's in this weird quasi-vegetative state, but Lilith now plans to save Kuma just like they are Vegapunk, so that really throws a wrench into things. Because if Kuma comes back as his normal self, it's pretty hard for me to imagine Bonney not just going with him, so that way they can visit the Sky Islands and wherever else they wanted to go together that they talked about back in the day. Not to mention, if Kuma does make it out of this, he would probably just return to the Revolutionary Army at some point, which might make a lot of sense for Bonney as well, because both Kuma and Ginny were a part of that way back when. Plus, you know, we had that whole thing in Marijois where Bonney and Sabo met each other, so they kind of have a connection already too. And one other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that Bonney still does have her own crew out there, so if she were to join us, Oda would have to figure out what to do with them. Now, she has been separated from them for a while because she went to the Reverie and got stuck in the eddy and all of that, so I've heard a lot of people assume they might be dead, but I mean, this is One Piece, they're definitely alive. And I mean, they were friends with Kuma and Ginny back in the day, as kind of like Bonnie's protector in the meantime, so they aren't just nobodies. And I mean, crews are obviously super important to their captains anyway, so at a bare minimum, if Bonney were to join, she'd have to tell them like she's grown enough so they can go back, or she's found her people, or something that just sends them back to Sorbet, I guess. But honestly, part of me thinks that once they come and find Bonney, she might just rejoin them because, I mean, she is a supernova after all. Or at the very least, if she did go with the revolutionaries, they would probably welcome her crew into the fold, so that might be a more natural place for all of them to end up. So to summarize, if Kuma does actually die during Elbaf, then I think the chance of Bonney joining skyrockets, but as of now, it doesn't seem that's going to be happening, and thus she probably won't. But you know, if Bonney isn't going to be our apprentice, we should maybe talk about the next best candidate for that, which I think is Colin. Now, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, honestly, and Colin sounds kind of weird, so Colin works for now. And this one might come as a bit of a surprise to you, but I think that if the Straw Hats were to ever truly get an apprentice on their ship, this is definitely the guy. We already saw him parallel Luffy, where he told Shanks he wanted to join his crew, but Shanks said no. We saw him acting as somewhat of a leader amongst the Elbaf kids, which shows he kind of has the temperament for this. And he's the son of Scopper Gaban, so his potential's through the roof. Not to mention that part of the risk of having an apprentice on your ship is that they're somewhat of an easy target. It's an extra person to take care of who usually can't defend themselves that well. But Colin is a freaking giant. I mean, yes, he's still a kid, but he's probably going to have a fraction of the risk that a normal kid would. Now, I do think there's a decent chance that he just stays on Elbaf after this and actually leads the other giant children, maybe even creating the new giant warrior pirates in the future. But I think I like the odds of him becoming an apprentice even more, honestly, because he could just sail with us for now and then start his own crew later once they're grown up and we save the world and all of that. But you know, going back to Loki potentially joining, I'm not sure if Oda would add two giants on the crew at the very same time. So if Loki does join, then I doubt Colin does. But if Loki ends up staying on the island, or if his giant stature is just a problem, then I think Colin will join instead. But next up, we have Carrot. And I know when I bring this up, people's minds go right into one of two camps. One is the Carrot fans who want her back in the story ASAP, and I know there's still a lot of you out there. I mean, she was one of the most popular characters on the last popularity poll, so it's not a surprise. And then the other is the group who thinks that this has already been decided. She's just going to be the Queen of Zou and then will join us in the final war. And if I'm being honest, I am in the second camp, and not just because I don't like Carrot or anything, but the story kind of speaks for itself at this point. Oda had every chance to make her join, but didn't do it. And he almost did the opposite, because by making Carrot the Queen of Zou, she almost can't come and rejoin the crew because she has other things to tend to. So I don't think that Carrot will ever become a full-fledged crewmate at this point. But thinking about Carrot's role in the future of the story did give me an idea. So I want to start with a question for you guys, which is, what is Oda's plan for Zunisha? Is Zunisha really going to live for the rest of the story, or potentially meet an untimely demise? They've already been alive for 1,000 years and committed some grave sin long ago, so dying, like Emeth probably did, is certainly on the table. And if Zunisha did die, then where would all the minks go? This could give Carrot a more important role than we were expecting in the future by leading and protecting all of the displaced minks. It's kind of a similar plotline to the fishmen as well, who are not only going to move to the surface sometime in the future, but also suffer some major attack as we saw in Shiarli's prophecy. And I would suspect that if Zunisha did die, then it would happen after Pluton gets freed, as that's Zunisha's ultimate purpose at this point. And with how close the minks are to the samurai, you know, Wano would be a perfect place for them to live. So I think Zunisha might just die right after freeing it so they can all move there. Like, as soon as Zunisha's mission is completed, it might just be done. And in a really ironic twist, if the minks move to Wano, that could mean that Momo would not only have a knockoff version of Kaido's fruit, but also a knockoff version of Kaido's zone army. Or honestly, it's like an improved version of that, because the smiles were kind of whack. back. Plus, Pedro's grave was placed in Wano and not in Zou, which I always thought was kind of weird, but maybe that's a bit of foreshadowing that Wano will be the mink's final home. Because if it was put on Zunisha's back, then it could potentially become a waste. But then if the minks did settle there and Pluton got freed around the very same time, that might provide a path for Kara to re-enter the story for similar reasons to Yamato and Momo. So while I still don't think she's gonna join the crew as an actual crewmate, she's probably gonna be a lot more relevant throughout the rest of the story than a lot of people were expecting. But now we're gonna talk about Gunko, and this one might come as a surprise to some of you as well, but I know there's at least one devout believer out there, and I do like the idea of her becoming our intelligence officer. But to be fair, with how popular of a character Gunko has become, and with her connections to Brook, whether that be liking his music or how she grew up with Brook, this idea really isn't all that crazy to me. Now, her being a God's Knight might pose a bit of a problem right now, but before Imu took over, we saw her kind of get her memories back and start running over to Brook, potentially hinting that she was freed from some of that brainwashing. So personally, I am fully suspecting that freeing Gunko from Imu will become a plot point sooner rather than later, because at a bare minimum, we need to do this to stop Imu, because Imu is wreaking havoc all over Elbaf, and I think once Brook realizes who she really is, then they're all probably going to try to save her instead, because they'll recognize that she's just being used. Now, how this all happens is a tough question. I kind of like the idea that Brook's music or his awakening somehow drives Gunko to free herself, but the main point is just that once we do save her, she'll probably be on our side, and that would make her a traitor in the eyes of the world government, so we'd be one of the only safe places for her, probably. And I mean, if she did join us, she would be able to explain how all of the God's Knight's powers work, who Imu is, what happened back in the day, and all of that stuff. But as of right now, I think she's just going to be a temporary ally to help tell the story of Brook and the God's Knights, instead of something more permanent. Plus, you know, we saw Imu vaporize Saturn for failing at Egghead, and I think if Gunko ends up freeing herself from Imu, Imu might do the very same thing to Gunko, which would be kind of tragic, but also pretty compelling, and I think that's probably where Oda's going. But next up, we have Lilith. Probably the most popular Vegapunk of them all, although Edison's definitely my favorite. And the stocks on her joining the crew went way up after Egghead, where obviously Lilith was the only satellite to make it out in one piece and sail with the Straw Hats, while the rest are either merged together like this Frankenpunk, or in the case of Stella, being cloned. I mean, pretty much anytime someone rides away with the crew like that, the are they joining the crew juices start flowing. But personally, I just can't see us getting a scientist on the crew who's even more knowledgeable than Frankie. Now, I'm not gonna say she's better than Frankie, because even his cola surprised Vegapunk, and I'm sure he's gonna have some ingenuity that'll shine at some point, but obviously she is much more aware of advanced technology than he is right now. And I just don't think Oda's gonna double up on the roles like that. It's actually part of why I don't think Carrot ever joined the crew, because we already had a talking animal aboard, and yes, Chopper's not a mink, but it's close enough, because Oda wants each Straw Hat to feel kinda unique, right? He wants them to stand out in their own way, and I don't know if Lilith really would. Or at least if he did have Lilith stand out, it might overshadow Frankie a bit. So hopefully she just teaches Frankie some things, or even hooks him up to punk records, because then he would not only be as smart as the Vegapunks, but he would probably surpass them eventually. But next up, we have the one and only Bon Clay. Now this might come as a surprise, because he's been MIA since chapter 666, where we saw on the cover that he was the new queen of level 5.5, but there was no way I could do a video on future Straw Hats without bringing this man up, because everyone loves Bon Clay. I mean, even my friends who are still getting caught up on the story tell me how much they love the guy, because he's got everything you would want in a crewmate. He's got a very close connection to Luffy, he's sacrificed himself multiple times now for the crew, he's even sacrificed himself for his other crew, being Baroque Works in the Miss Golden Week cover story, and he's just an all-around good dude if you forget everything he did while he was in Baroque Works. And I think having Bon Clay on the crew could be a really fun mirror to Blackbeard's crew, because Katarina Devon also has the ability to copy people's appearances. We've seen Bon Clay do this with people like Cobra, where they started a civil war in Alabasta, or in the past we saw Higurashi use the fruit to pretend to be Sukiyaki. And it seems like Blackbeard's crew is kinda aiming for a similar goal right now, because Katarina copied Saturn's appearance. So there is maybe some plot relevance to us getting Bon Clay on the crew, and I know earlier earlier I brought up Yamato versus Devon, but I mean Bon Clay versus Devon could be even more iconic. But with Bon Clay being an impelled down right now, we'd obviously need another breakout for him to even have a chance to join the crew. But personally, I think that's pretty much a foregone conclusion because Doflamingo and Weevil and everyone else need to get freed in the final saga at some point, and if Bon Clay does escape, then I feel like he's just destined to meet up with the crew at least one more time before the story's over. But I gotta say, I do doubt that he would become a full-fledged crewmate, because on one hand, I think Oda's just planning on Bon Clay sacrificing himself for the Straw Hats again before he even has the chance to join, because he's already done it twice, and now we can kind of complete the trifecta. And also, just like how Bon Clay took Ivankov's place as the leader of level 5.5 and Impel Down, I feel like Bon Clay is going to take Eva's place as the leader of Kamabaka Queendom as well. Now, I love Ivankov, I don't want anything to happen to him, but maybe he gets too busy with the revolutionaries and passes the leadership on to Bon Clay, or maybe Eva just gets captured or something. But one way or another, I think that Bon Clay's future role in the story is to lead the Okama into the final war to support the Straw Hats, as opposed to just becoming a Straw Hat himself. And next, I want to talk a little bit about Momonosuke. And I think whenever I bring him up, there's a lot of the same thoughts as Carrot, which is, you know, he's leading his own country now, and by Oda giving him so much responsibility, it's sort of hard to imagine him leaving that to go join the crew at this point. But just like Carrot and also Yamato, this entire Pluton and Zunisha situation could change that pretty quickly. If somebody attacks and takes Pluton, then Momo is like the perfect person to fly over to Elbaf and tell the crew. And you know, he is the one who commands Zunisha, so if Zunisha does live for the rest of the story, then Momo's gonna have to leave at some point in order to command it for the final war. And we even saw in the mural that there was a person with a crown on top of Zunisha, which is probably depicting somebody in the past as well, like whenever Zunisha committed that great crime. But I think it's also some foreshadowing for the future with Momo and Zunisha in the final war, or at least in some moment leading up to the final war. But now, does all of that mean that Momo's really gonna become a full-fledged crewmate? Well, I think it kind of depends on your definition, because I can see Momo going with the crew to Laugh Tale, because obviously his dad went to Laugh Tale alongside the Roger Pirates, and much like I said earlier with Yamato, it might make sense for these people who've inherited Odin's will to also go to Laugh Tale and learn everything the world has to offer. Not to mention that there's also Odin's journal, which Momo noticed was missing a couple pages from it, and I feel like if he's really gonna surpass Odin, which is his goal now, then he's gonna need to learn all the truths of the world as well. Now, does that mean that he would be considered a true Straw Hat? Well, he did already ride around with the crew for a while, and he has a very close connection to them, especially Luffy. So even if he hitches a ride at the very last second, I feel like he would be considered a Straw Hat in the grand scheme of things, but obviously he wouldn't be like a typical one, and I don't think he'd get on the ship for any prolonged period of time at this point. So I think it really just depends on your definition, but I would say probably. Now, lastly, I want to talk about these last two characters together, which are Smoker and Koby. Now, Smoker joining the crew is an idea that the community has talked about for a while now, probably since Morge's videos on the topic, and Koby joining the crew is something that's been around since basically chapter 2, because that was Luffy's first friend that he made after setting sail. And the reason I wanted to talk about these two together is because not only are they both Garp parallels, where Smoker was Luffy's first Marine rival and even followed him around for a while, and then Koby became Garp's protege and even called the future of the Marines, but they're also both Marines who do things the right way and for the right reasons, but are willing to act outside the scope of their orders if necessary, because they know that the Marines aren't always doing the right thing. We know this because Koby's in Sword, and he even stood up to Akainu at Marineford, and there's a lot of theories that Smoker could be in Sword as well, but even if he's not, he's been doing his own thing for a while, so he'd be a pretty good candidate. And while a lot of these factors might make it seem like these two are good matches for the Straw Hat crew, I think it's actually the opposite, because they're the type of people that should stay in the Marines and try to make it better. And the reason that people join the Marines in the first place is to stop evil pirates and protect people, and I just think that them joining the pirates, even if the Straw Hats are good, kinda goes against that entire thing. I mean, even recently Koby said that he has to stop Luffy from achieving his dream, so I think these two characters, almost more than any other, are the ones who are gonna stay with the Marines through the end, and probably even be a part of the future leadership of the Marines once everything's said and done. But now, with that being said, I do expect Koby and Luffy to team up at some point in the future, which my last video was about, and I'll link that below in case you're interested, but I don't see either of these guys becoming a Straw Hat. But alright guys, we have finally reached the end, so let me know what you think down below, which ones I got wrong, wrong, which ones I should have included, that kind of thing. And if you enjoyed the video, then please hit like before you get out of here. But most importantly, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys next time. Later.